In the last video, I showed you something called the Cyrus pattern. The idea that God has a consistent mechanism, a 3-move sequence where he allows pressure, raise an unlikely instrument, and then he releases his people into something that they couldn't have ever built without the crucible. I also told you that there's a specific text, Ezekiel 38, that describes the 4th move in detail. It names nation, it names geography, it names a coalition that Ezekiel had absolutely no natural idea this would ever exist. So today, we're going to open that text, and I want to show you something that will permanently change the way you read the Bible and the news. Let's get to it. But first, here's what most people do with Ezekiel 38. Most people treat it like a date-setting exercise. So they read the coalitions, they read the map to modern countries, they find a news headline that fits what they're saying, and then it doesn't happen. And they look foolish, and they quietly stop talking about Ezekiel 38 until the next news cycle gives them a brand new angle. That's not what we're doing today, because that entire approach misses what Ezekiel 38 is actually for. This text is not a calendar, it's a framework. The difference between those two things are everything. Okay, so here's what I'm going to show you today. Now, the Cyrus pattern has 3 moves that you already know: the crucible, instrument, and the release. The 4th move is what Ezekiel 38 adds, and it is fundamentally changes the whole entire mechanism. That God stops using a human instrument, a person, entirely. Number 2, the Gog-Magog coalition map. Ezekiel 38 names specific nations, and I'm going to show you exactly who those nations correspond to, not as a speculation, but as documented geological facts. 3rd, the mechanism shift. This is the theological hinge of the entire series. In episode 1, God used Cyrus, a human leader. But in Ezekiel 38, God removes the human instrument and acts directly. Finally, the watchman post is what Ezekiel 38 tells us about how to hold this information. And that formation piece is the whole point. Let's get to it. Okay, let's do a quick recap for anyone who is new to the series. The Cyrus pattern follows 3 specific moves. Move 1, God allows his people to enter a season of pressure, exile, loss, displacement. Everything that felt stable gets removed entirely. Move 2, God raises up a secular instrument or a secular leader, often pagan, an unlikely leader, sometimes and most times the person who doesn't even believe in him, and he used that person to accomplish his purposes. Move 3, through the instrument, God releases his people back to rebuild what was broken and what was destroyed. That is the Cyrus pattern in Isaiah 44 and 45 that documents this through Cyrus, the king of Persia. But here's the theological question that Ezekiel 38 is designed to answer. What happens when the coalition is so large, the threat so existential, that there is no Cyrus available, no secular leader? I believe God maneuvers into position, and that's exactly the scenario in Ezekiel 38. And the answer the text gives is the most important thing I want you to understand. You gotta understand this today. God doesn't wait for an instrument. God, he acts directly. All right, let's clear the table, okay? Divine intervention, unmediated, undeniable, and specifically designed so that no human leader can take credit for the outcome. Look at Ezekiel 38 verses 18 through 23. When the Gog coalition comes against Israel, God says he will act directly. Earthquakes, military confusion, every man's sword against his brother, torrential rain, hailstones, fire, sulfur, all of the above. And then the critical line is in verse 23. You got to listen to this. So I will show my greatness and my holiness, and I will make myself known in the eyes of many nations. Then they will know I am the Lord. That little phrase, then they will know I am the Lord, is the theological signature for the fourth move. It marks a moment when God acts without human intervention or instrument, specifically so that nations cannot contribute the outcome to human power and strength. Okay, before I walk you through the maps, I want to say something clearly. The identification of biblical ancient nations corresponding with modern countries is not an exact science. And I'm not going to tell you exactly where the debate is. I may talk about it a little bit, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about where the debate exists and where it doesn't. Okay, I'm not going to paper over uncertainties and make an argument clearer than it actually is. But what I will show you is that even with the debate identification, the directional picture of Ezekiel 38 is remarkable and is coherent with modern day geological maps. All right, so Ezekiel 38 opens by addressing someone called Gog in the land of Magog, chief princes of Meshech and Tubal. The nation named in the coalitions are these: Persia, Cush, Put, Gomer, Bethargma, and the people described as being somewhere in the far north. Now let's map each one of these. Magog and the directional reference far north, most scholars, ancient and modern, put Russia country as that on the map. High confidence, broadly agreed by most. Persia is the one that no one is debating about. That's modern day Iran, and that's a straight historical line. Cush, the region south of Egypt, is modern day Sudan and the Horn of Africa. Put, the North African coast region, is modern day Libya. Gomer and Bethargma link historically to Anatolia and Caucasus. That's the current day geography of modern day Turkey. Okay? All right. Now, step back from individual identification and look at the whole picture. Okay? So what Ezekiel 38 is describing in this coalition is led from the north, Russia. Russia supplies Iran with an air defense system that they are not just aligned, but they are operationally integrated. That's important for you to understand. Turkey, which also shows up in the coalition, has been drifting away from NATO's alignment in unprecedented ways more than they have ever in history. Turkey purchased Russian S-400 missile systems in direct defiance against NATO protocol. Libya and Sudan, the most debated in our map identifications, have both seen significant Russian presence in exactly the years this coalition has been formed. Now, here's what I need you to sit with, okay? When Ezekiel wrote this text between 593 and 597 BC, Persia and the north region of Caucasus were not aligned. They were competitors. The nation Ezekiel named did not share language, religion, trade, network, or military interests together. There is no natural basis for predicting that kind of coalition. A political analyst in 539, working from the available intelligence that he or she had, would have produced a completely different list altogether. And yet, here we are. The coalition that looked impossible from Ezekiel's vantage point has been assembled and been putting together in real time in the exact geographical configuration described in the text. And listen to me, y'all. I think that deserves to be taken seriously. Hey, if you are looking for a community to join, to become a part of, where we can share ideas even in more detail and figure out how to apply to our life, join our SKU community. This community has people who are intellectually curious, who try to understand what the Bible has to say about our current times. Well, the link is in the description. I want to get to know you better, and I want to have a conversation with you. Click the link, join the community, and let's do change together. Okay, so let me bring you back to episode 1 just for a moment. The mechanism shift only makes sense if you can feel the contrast with what came before, okay? In the Cyrus pattern, God's method was indirect. He worked through geopolitical circumstances, through ambitions of a pagan king who had no idea he was serving divine purposes. So the mechanism was hidden inside of normal human history. You could watch the fall of Babylon and explain everything as a single event through natural causes, and you'd be right to do that. So those natural causes were real, and God was working through all of the natural causes simultaneously with divine intervention. Ezekiel 38 describes something categorically different from all of that. Earthquakes, military confusion, where soldiers turn on each other, torrential rain, hailstorms, fire, sulfur, all of these things, these are not normal military outcomes. This is something totally different. God specifically says in verse 23 that he will make himself known in the eyes of every nation. So God removes the ambiguity altogether. So in the Cyrus moment, you could argue about whether God was involved at all. But in the Ezekiel 38 pattern moment, the text says that the argument will not even be available in the future. So why does God go through Cyrus, working through him, hidden and indirect through natural and political events, to working in a way that's unmistakably direct? I think the answer is in the purpose. The Cyrus moment is about release, freeing the exiles, rebuilding the temple, a relative localized purpose. God used a human instrument because the outcome was a human scale event. The Ezekiel 38 moment is about something much bigger, because the text says in verse 23 that God says, I will make myself known to all nations. That's a global announcement. And for that purpose, human instrument would undermine that announcement because it's selfish in nature. If a general wins the battle, the people give credit to the general. But if God wins the battle in a way that no general could get credit for it, God is the source. And that's the point. All right. So now we have a complete sequence, and I want to name it so you can hold on to it. Move 1, the crucible. God allows his people to go through seasons of pressure. This is a formation stage. Move 2, the instrument. God raises a secular pagan leader, and he uses that leader to advance his purpose. Think Cyrus. Move 3, the release. Through an instrument, God releases his people into a new season and a new stage of restoration. Move 4, after the purpose of a human instrument are totally exhausted, God acts directly. No instrument, no ambiguity, no nation, God alone. The Cyrus episode covers moves 1 through 3, and Ezekiel 38, move 4. Now you have the full arc of how God is moving in this situation. Now, I want to address something that I know you're sitting there and you're thinking about right now at that moment, okay? You've seen the coalition map that I've explained, and some of you are anxious about it because there's a thing that you need to understand that Ezekiel 38, it can go in 2 directions, okay? It can make you watchful or it can make you frantic. It can produce a spiritual depth and steadfastness, or it can produce a prophetic obsession that pulls you out of actual life into scanning headlines and being in a sense of panic, or feel like you need to explain how the Bible is proof text in modern day news events, okay? But the text itself says something about that. Ezekiel 38 is not an address to a general public. It's a message to watchmen. All right, so earlier in Ezekiel 33, God tells Ezekiel that he made him a watchman for the house of Israel, right? A watchman's job is specific. He stands at the wall. He reads the landscape, what's going on. He calls out what he sees. He doesn't abandon the wall in panic, right? He doesn't fall asleep. From my experience, The worst thing that can happen in a watchman position is one or two failures. You can either fall asleep and miss the event entirely, or get so worked up about the potential threat that you start seeing threats in everywhere. You exhaust yourself and you become useless, right? And you can't even realize when the real threat comes. The Ezekiel 38 framework is designed to produce neither of those outcomes. It produces a watchman who knows what they're looking for and understands the landscape and maintains their post with calm and with clarity. Here's the second thing about a watchman posture: to be informed, not obsessed. Daniel understood the prophetic framework better than most anyone in the scripture. He studied it. He prayed through it. He tracked the geopolitical movements of Babylon, of Persia, right? And the kingdoms that followed. He did all of that while maintaining excellence in his profession and in his life, faithfully praying, practicing a deep relationship with his family and with God and the people around him. The prophetic awareness didn't consume his life, it informed his life. So the goal of Ezekiel 38 is not to become a prophetic commentator. The goal is to live with such clarity about the direction of history that your daily choices matter. Who you serve, what you build, how you invest your time are shaped by your long view that most people around you don't even have access to. Third posture, a builder, not a spectator. The exiles who came back from Babylon after the Cyrus decree, they didn't stand at the roofs of Jerusalem and wait for God to build something supernaturally. They got involved. They put their hands to the plow. Nehemiah organized the labor. Ezra taught text. Zerubbabel oversaw the construction of the temple. The divine release created the conditions to rebuild, but to rebuild required active, committed work from God's people. So if the instruments are in motion right now, the question isn't when will God or when does God act? The question is, what are you building right now that matters when the release comes? Your family, your community, your craft, your theological depth, your emotional resiliency, your ability to hold other people's anxieties without being consumed by it. This is what you're called to do. These are the building materials of a watchman posture, right? It isn't passive, but it is active in preparation for rebuilding that will come in the future, okay? Now, I've showed you the fourth move as promised. I'll walk you through the coalition map. I've given you the mechanism shift and the watchman posture. But there is one piece of this series that I have not told you yet. And I saved it for last because of this reason. The most unexpected thing in all of Persia Rising text, the thing that nobody talks about when they talk about biblical prophecy in Iran. After the judgment of Ezekiel 38, after the Revelation event, there is another text. And Isaiah 19 doesn't describe Iran's destruction. It doesn't describe the permanent defeat of Israel's enemies. It describes Egypt and Assyria, which covers modern Iraq and Syria and part of Iran and Israel worshiping together. You heard me right. And God calls Assyria, the ancient empire that scattered the northern kingdom, my people. The same words he used for Israel. And that's the ending of this series. Not war, not destruction, not vindication of one side over and against another. The end of the full arc of this whole series is toward reconciliation. And it completely reframes everything we've talked about in episodes 1 and in episode 2. Because of this, if that's where the story ends, then the war in Ezekiel 38 is not the climax. It's a passageway. And the people who understand that live differently from the people who think the war is the point. And in God's mind, the war is never the point. So we're going to open with Isaiah 19 in series in episode 3. Make sure you subscribe because this video is going to change how you read the entire arc of current history. Now, if this video helped you see something you haven't seen before, I need you to share this with someone who's watching the news and trying to make theological sense of everything they're seeing. Hit the subscribe button or the like button. Put a comment below. I want to hear from you. It helps this channel reach people who are asking the exact questions that I bring up in this video. I'm Lionel. Make sure you keep your eyes rooted in faith and your hands building towards something great. I'll see you in episode 3, okay? Salute. Peace.